Matt Rhule is gone. Matt Rhule is gone. Matt Rhule is gone. That basically sums up the 2022 Carolina Panthers, right? This episode, we're going to break down all of the things that happened to this team on and off the field that made them such a unique story. Obviously, the coach change, trading away the best player on the team, going through three different bad quarterbacks, and breaking down the 2022 Carolina Panthers right now. Welcome to Local Football Flavor, connecting the fan bases of the NFL.
All right, Panthers fans, Joe and I are here. We're going to talk what was the Panthers season and what was it, right? We were greeted with a team at the beginning of the season that was drastically different than the team we saw at the end of the season. Our primary man crush in fantasy football, Christian McCaffery, gone by mid-season. We had a coaching change. There was lots to talk about with the Carolina Panthers. And our guest, Dave, who's a Carolina Panthers fan at the beginning of the season, did not have high hopes for the Carolina Panthers. And one of his calls to arms was fire Matt Rhule. Well, that happened. And thankfully enough for Carolina Panthers Nation, that was a godsend. And from that point on, yes, the Panthers struggled a couple of weeks with the interim head coach after that. They did trade Christian McCaffery in that interim, but they actually won quite a few games to end the season. And there was a point in time, a shimmering, glimmering, little tiny sliver of hope that the Carolina Panthers could make the playoffs with a record under 500. It was there. It was there. But what got in the way? Well, there was a couple things that got in the way, and one of the biggest things that got in the way is the quarterback situation. And this has been a bugaboo for the Carolina Panthers for years. And they finally figured this out and said to themselves, I don't need to hold on to Christian McCaffery, who is taking up the majority of my budget. I can get rid of him, and I could trade him for other assets, and I can put somebody else in there because if we look at what the running back pool is in the NFL, there's a lot of pretty decent to very, very good running backs that aren't named Christian McCaffery. And now Christian McCaffrey's electric. I am not going to place that. There is no hate in my book for Christian McCaffery. He's electric. He's one of the best running backs, pass catchers, and running backs in the league. Now, when you get rid of him, you can't really replace him. And they're not trying to. And one of the reasons why they got to get rid of him is nobody can get him the ball. And when they get him the ball, they know that he's the only weapon that has the chance to do anything. And so when you watch the Carolina Panthers earlier in the season during that big losing skid, and you look at where the ball was going, and you look at these, the next-gen stats for Christian McCaffery and Chuba Hubbard and all these players, the teams knew exactly what was going to happen. It was predictable. It was get McCaffery to the left, get McCaffery in open space, get him to the flat. And they stopped it. Now, sometimes they didn't, and McCaffery would rack up like 100 yards, 125 yards, 99 yards. But you could see that was not doing anything for the Carolina Panthers because in the end, what was going on with the Carolina Panthers was very much a quarterback problem, very much an offensive coordinating problem. And when you see what's happening with the Carolina Panthers, you might say, Joe, that, this team is in dire straits.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not really there yet. I think they are, but I think that this team has a lot of young talent on it, particularly on defense, that we have some hope for if they can get this quarterback situation right, Joe. So talk to us a little bit about what you saw with the quarterbacks for the Carolina Panthers and what your thoughts are on them over the season.
Well, watching the Carolina Panthers quarterback situation was watching a living train wreck. There's just no way around that. I mean, we start the year with Baker, who has turnover city in week one, doesn't even make it to the halfway point of the season. And then, I'm sorry, people, Darnold's not an NFL quarterback. Just to give you one particular stat line, when he played New Orleans, a game in which they won, the last game of the year, he had for the first three quarters one completion per quarter. This isn't 1912. That doesn't work. At the end of the day, the guy takes way too long to read the ball, and he's not accurate. So if you want someone who's going to get sacked and throw a lot of incomplete passes, Darnold's your man. If you want a real game and be able to win with this team, you got to do what they ultimately did: lose all faith in Darnold and run the ball like crazy, which is what Carolina did that got them back into it. Yes, it's not McCaffery, but between Devontae and Hubbard, they were able to run it. And that's essentially what they turned their team into: a very, very light version of the Tennessee Titans. Like, we're just going to run the ball, and hope to God it's not third and long. That was the Carolinas offense from the moment that McCaffrey left, and they had to, and Baker left as well. The crying shame of this all is DJ Moore is an electric, and he's probably the best talent that's underutilized in the NFL. And it's because of this quarterback situation. The offensive line has a lot of negative stats associated with it that are not the offensive line's fault. Baker Mayfield is a turnover machine.
Mm-hmm.
He just is. He only really completes passes when he rolls to his right. He has virtually no ability to roll to his left, and he's too short to throw the ball out of the middle consistently.
Mm-hmm.
He was a horrible pick in the first place. Darnold, who they ended up with, can give you one thing: I know where the ball's going. I'm chucking it over everyone's head, and as long as I can do that in a 3-step drop, it will go in the air. It'll only be completed 20% of the time, but when it works, Sports Center will love me. That's the Darnold approach to football. Otherwise, you're sacking him. So we bring in a quarterback into Carolina that is willing to read the field quickly, capable of reading the field quickly, and moving downfield. This team has a chance. There is offensive talent here. There is a very underrated offensive line because of the quarterbacks behind them. And this is where I just want to take a pause. Sacks are not an offensive line stat exclusively. The quarterback has a great deal to do with that. So, Bob, as you mentioned there with the defense was the shining point of this team. The defense kept them in games that, quite frankly, I didn't think they would have been a part of. And if you look at my gambling going through the season, Carolina is one of the worst teams I did with, because that defense didn't quit. And there's a tremendous amount of statement to that, because they were on a team that was essentially eliminated from the playoffs. They fired their head coach, for crying out loud. Who fires their head coach and keeps the team engaged? It's very hard to do, but that defense did. It was, like I said, not a bunch of world beaters on it when we look at the stats from this season. But if you give an offense on the other side that is competent and capable, it can be there. And one other final thought about Carolina: their punter, when this is Carolina, so this is saying something, broke the record for most punts inside the 20 in franchise history. And that's a franchise that's used to punting. So the field position, the defense was able to hold on to it, and the punter was able to take him over the top. You add all that up, it's close games. Running the ball works well. There's a pathway to victory that is not outlandish, but it's going to be off the beating path of the NFL. So, Bob, where do you see this going?
Yeah, so when we do look at Carolina and we do look at the defense, there are a lot of guys on this defense that people can be excited about. Yeah, they didn't have the best year this year. It is a bright spot, but they didn't have the best year this year. Their secondary gave up a lot of yards. Their secondary gave up a lot of touchdowns. The game scores, they never really. I think there was only a couple games where they held them below 20 points. But when you look at guys like Luvu and J.C. Horn, linebacker and cornerback respectively, you've got something really nice to build around. And when you compare that with a good rush, which they need a rush, and they need to be able to cause havoc. You've got a really young defense that I think could really make some forward strides in this upcoming year. And basically what we're looking for out of the Carolina Panthers and what we saw out of the Carolina Panthers this year is that you need somebody to trust. You need somebody to build around. And for the last several years, they've tried to build around Christian McCaffery, and that was proven to be the wrong person to build around, unfortunately. And I know a lot of Carolina Panthers fans might disagree with that, but it was the wrong person to build around, especially with the way that the NFL was going. Running backs are solid, running backs are good, but you don't build around the running backs per se. You build around a running attack, you build around a running game, and you get players that fit the mold, but you don't break the bank on the running back. And the Giants are going to probably do that with Saquon Barkley, giving him the franchise tag, and that's probably not going to work out well for the Giants. But when we look at what today's NFL is picture to, and this is why the Tennessee Titans, how you said Carolina looked like a Tennessee Titans light towards the end of the season. Well, you saw what happened to the Tennessee Titans. They were a playoff team last year. They were very much not a playoff team this year.
That quarterback play will do that.
And you look at that quarterback play. Now there was a game where PJ Walker looked good. Then there was a game where he looked absolutely disgusting. There was a game where Sam Darnold looked good, and then a game where he looked absolutely disgusting. Like, there was zero consistency with the Carolina Panthers this year. The only thing consistent was that they would lose. That was the only consistency with the Carolina.
First half of the year, yeah.
You knew that losses were coming. I mean, they lost to the Browns. They lost to the Niners. The teams that they lost to, it's like you were saying, they're not world beaters. But when it comes down, they got smoked by the Bengals, which we were expecting to happen. They lost to the Falcons. They beat the Bucks. They went. I mean, like, these things, like these games, like, you look at the early season and then you look at the late season and you're saying, man, if Carolina might have played like this all year, we could be looking at a different scenario. And like I said, they almost squeaked into the playoffs. So that tells you about that division. They're playing in a bad division. I mean,
yeah,
there's no way about it. They're playing in a division with aging or zero quarterbacks. They're playing in a division where we have Desmond Ridder, where we have these four quarterbacks as probably being the starters if nothing else happens this year. You have Kyle Trask, Desmond Ridder, Sam Darnold / PJ Walker, and Andy Dalton. That
hurt my heart.
That's a beatable schedule. I don't know who else they're playing, but they've got enough young talent, and they just need to build on it. If they build around this young talent, and the new head coach can do this, because Steve Wilkes did an amazing job coming in and just saying, Robbie Anderson, get out of my face. You're gone. Get out. We don't need you anymore. Christian McCaffery, love you, but you got to go too. And then he held tight on Brian Burns. He held tight on a couple other guys that we thought that there was going to be a fire sale mid-season. And we were talking about all these guys leaving. And and the ownership held fast. They didn't trade those guys because they have a plan for them. And that was the smart move. And I think Carolina is in a better position than they were at the beginning of this year with a new coach. Now, granted, they've got a cast-off cast of coaches, okay, going into this next season. And we'll get into that at another time. But what they were able to do this year is bright in comparison to how they started the year. And you always look for teams to end the season better than they started. And you always look for players to come out of the woodwork towards the end of the season because they've got a full season under their belts. They just need to figure out this quarterback situation. And I honestly don't know what the answer is because they've tried everything. Nothing works. What do you do?
Well, they already did the most important thing. They got rid of Matt Rhule. And that by itself is the bright force moving forward for Carolina. That they were willing to accept we're not living out the 7 years that Rhule was signed for, and we're moving on. Next step, obviously, is the quarterback. With everything you just went through, there was a lot of unproven, if not scary, for those teams there. This division is going to have more turnover at starting quarterback than any other division in football. And as much as it hurts Carolina to jump on that path, I think we could hopefully say the reason the quarterbacks didn't work was Matt Rhule, and getting him out of the equation, we might be able to build something here now. We might be actually able to develop one of these guys rather than playing rotisserie with the 20th best quarterback in the NFL over and over and drastically paying too much for each of the 20th best quarterback. So with that
Yeah.
said, check out our future episode of Carolina Panthers preparing for the draft and what to do in the offseason. Matt Rhule's still gone. Matt Rhule's still gone. Matt Rhule's still gone. Check out here for other action we have at Local Football Flavor on the NFC South. And over here is the next team we'll be covering in our year reviews, the New Orleans Saints.